Engage. Disrupt. Adapt. Repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Welcome to this edition of Pure Reinvention, a community of curious professionals interested in the reinvention process. We're here today to talk to Renee Lewis, who is the Executive Director of the Detroit Local Organizing Committee for ASAE 2015, which is August 8th through the 11th. Misty, we're going to change things up. Can you believe it?
I'm excited. I think that's what we do best.
We actually had captured Renee a number of months ago, and in kind of coming back around and listening to her interview, we discovered that it was a perfect place to introduce meeting planners to why Detroit in the Pure Reinvention process. How did that come about, Misty?
I think, how did it come about? Like all great things, it begins with a conversation. But I think that when we looked back and listened to it, we realized that Renee had some great points that we could make a little more relevant to our audience as we lead into ASAE 2015 and make it kind of an exciting experience to tie Detroit to meeting planners that are coming in town, maybe for the first time.
I think that's absolutely right. Meeting planners are probably one of the first groups of individuals who are tasked with the responsibility to find content that is different and relevant and intriguing and allows us to make a change. And it's sometimes very difficult, having been a meeting planner in some of the work that I've done in the past, to really know what those new and innovative content and subject matters are. But here we are in Detroit, a brand new concept of a learning laboratory, a absolutely outstanding ASAE convention coming up in a couple of weeks. And so this podcast is dedicated to those meeting planners, those meeting professionals, those individuals looking for something new and different. And I think, Misty, we've gotten great sound bites from Renee, which really speak to the essence of what a meeting planner would be interested in listening for.
I think so. Renee was tapped, I think, close to 3 years ago now, if my memory serves me correct, to spearhead the Detroit Local Organizing Committee. And I know firsthand that she attended other ASAE annual meetings and worked closely with the people in Detroit and ASAE representatives to make sure that we were going to give a very unique feel to the convention coming to Detroit.
And they are absolutely going to knock this out of the park. And it is my hope that meeting planners from around the country are inspired by what the introduction of what's happening in Detroit is. And they go back home and they say, this is something that we can get involved with. This is something that can connect us to the lessons learned in the city of Detroit. This is something that will be of value to us, and we can make it something of ours.
And so what we have first up is Renee kind of talking to meeting planners directly about why Detroit and what they can get in Detroit that they may not get other places.
If you're looking at Detroit, or if you haven't looked at Detroit, would like to consider them, you can be assured that by the momentum that has kind of taken place and is now starting to be verbalized, especially over this last year, that change is going to continue.
I really like what Renee was talking about with a city in progress. I think the most exciting thing that Detroit has to offer is it is a city with so much progress that it's a continual place to look at the landscape and see what this great city has to offer.
Well, that's the fun thing about bringing your event to Detroit right now is you get to see not the final polished version, you get to see the work in progress. And there's so much more to learn from it while it's happening than at the end.
I want to introduce a concept that I think it's really important, and I think sometimes we just think that all of the content that we create is in the meeting. And there's an opportunity in Detroit to create experiences outside of the meeting which really give dramatic support to the message that you may have within your meeting. And Renee talks about the importance of the experience outside of the meeting, Misty.
I think that it's really important when you are considering a destination for your next event that you make sure that it's not just about the conference space itself, but about the surrounding city. And you're right, I think Renee makes a great point about how Detroit can offer that.
I think that's something meeting planners can really grab a hold of, is this opportunity to look at Detroit from an outside of the meeting experience and how it dramatically adds to the credibility of the content in the meeting is a really unique competitive advantage that Detroit offers today.
It's nothing like I've ever seen or heard of before, which makes it really exciting that it's in our home state, but people can get here. It's accessible. We're right by a major airport, and there's a lot of stuff to do once you get downtown.
So I think in the downtown and midtown area, which is where most of the meetings are held, associations or corporations, the progress, you can really see it now, and it's sustainable. It's not dependent on one industry. It's not dependent on a structure in the city government that might have been very cumbersome. Now things are moving much more quickly and nimble. So I think as a meeting planner, you're always looking for what are the best rates for my organization, what's the best space, do they have my dates available? But the other part of that is that your members or your attendees experience the destination. So you need to make sure that the infrastructure is there for them. Can they get around easily? Are there taxis? Is it a walkable place? Are there restaurants, and are they open at the right times? Are there things for people to do outside of your meeting itself?
You used an interesting word, Renee, which I want to kind of talk a little bit more about. And you really talked about sustainable reinvention, which is very different than just reinventing. Can you speak for a minute about what to you sustainable reinvention looks like? And especially then if you're a meeting planner or somebody thinking about the city of Detroit to come and learn about reinvention, why is this thing called sustainable reinvention so important?
In my opinion, or in my experience, really, you can change something if it doesn't have legs to stand on or it's not nimble enough that it can change over time. You're going to have to go back to change it again. So, for instance, I used to work for an association, and when I first got there, there was this big conversation about we have too many conflicts. Our members were saying we have too many conflicts in our conference schedule. I've got all these committee meetings and I want to go to these sessions and there's not enough time in the day. Convention committee, go back and redo the convention format.
How many times, Misty, have we heard it's time for us to redo something? In this particular case, Renee was talking about redo the convention format. How many times have we said to each other, this is just a fresh coat of paint on an old problem, and it will never get to the core of what the real issue is?
We've said it many. In fact, if I had a penny for every time I've heard someone say that or said it myself, I would be a rich woman.
It's interesting to note that everybody recognizes that they want to make some sort of a change, but they're a little bit fearful to make too big of a change. So again, they just keep putting fresh coats of paint on, hoping it will really solve the problem. Yet what they really end up doing is going back, actually in a very short period of time, and rehashing and re-talking about the same old stories. And I'll bet our listeners have direct experience with just exactly that.
I absolutely believe they do. I mean, how many times have you heard just exactly what Renee was saying, but how many times have you asked, what are the core changes to make for my conference to be new, to be innovative, and to be continually relevant to our attendees? I
think that's one of the really interesting stories about the city of Detroit is they did not have the luxury of just continuing to put a new coat of paint on something. In their particular case, they had to ask the question, when are we going to build a new model?
And that's exactly what Renee did, or was forced to do at her previous association before she was tapped for this role she has now to help reinvent the ASAE meeting.
One of the most exciting things I've seen with the great influx of millennials coming into the marketplace, and certainly into the association marketplace, they can tell the difference between an old coat of paint and a new coat of paint and really changing what the model is.
In a brand new room, they can. So let's hear Renee tell her story about how she really reinvented her conference offering.
I've got a feeling you're about to tell me fundamentally you were ready to launch into something pretty dramatic.
Yes, very dramatic. In fact, in some cases we talked about, well, we used to do 2 conventions a year. Should we do only 1 convention and 1 committee days? Should we really change things? But what we found was certain things were interrelated. And so in that case, we made some more significant changes. But, were we just changing things for the reasons of the members saying certain members having conflicts, or were we building a model where we could bring new people in and add more value? So I guess you can make changes because someone feels that it's not working for them, but in 5 years it might still not be working for them. And you may have another group of people that it might not be working for. So for instance, we were trying to get a lot more younger professionals involved in that industry, and especially the association. And we were getting students to be a part of our organization and connect, but there was a disconnect between the time when they graduated school until they got kind of mid-level in their career. So we needed to really reevaluate what our value proposition was from an educational standpoint, as well as not only for the conference, but overall for our organization, and really reinvent how we could bring or stay connected to those individuals from the time they were a student. So I guess, you can just make some changes and say you're reinventing or introducing new and improved product, but at the same time, you're not always solving the issue.
So what I'm really hearing Renee say is that sometimes you can't bend to the will of a few when what you really need is create some sort of sustainable product that will benefit a mass.
I think that's absolutely right, Misty. That I think there's a tendency to just solve a conflict that a few people may have, but that really doesn't fundamentally change the attraction that you really want to create. And what I heard Renee talk about was if we can find the real gap, the area where we're not attracting in this large group of people that we want, and we can then reinvent within that space, that's how we keep people connected. And to me, that was just a marvelous thought process, is just don't solve a problem for your attendees, even though that may be a part of your focus, but actually look at where your big gaps are. And your big gaps are likely to be where you'll find greater solutions.
I know that Renee has the Certified Meeting Professional designation, and I think that there's something to be said about the training that you get as a CMP to sort of look in a holistic way at what you're offering your attendees. And like we said, not that just catering to a few, but really creating something that's sustainable, something that will perpetuate and people can genuinely learn from.
I think one of the opportunities that Detroit has to share is the private-public partnership that they have by necessity had to implement. I'm going to guess that most meeting planners only think about the resources within their own entity. Out of necessity, Detroit had to learn how to create new partnerships, public-private, in order to create new deliverables. It very well could be that there's an opportunity, even within the association space, to think about how you create new partnerships with new entities to create new deliverables. And again, Detroit may be a great place to learn. How do you create those public-private or those different partnerships that do deliver new results?
Well, you know as well as I do, what you're really talking about is one of our 5 fundamentals, which is connect and making those different connections. And what we're going to hear in the next segment with Renee is that she really does understand one of the other primary drivers for why people attend conferences like that, and it's for the connections.
Let's listen.
Well, I think one of the reasons that anyone joins an association, if that's what we're speaking about, or any kind of member-based organization, is because they are trying to connect with other people, and they are trying to do things in their business better. It could be better, it could be faster, it could be more efficiently, and I think they're looking for answers, and they may also be looking for ways that they can innovate in their own organizations. So I think, and if we're specifically talking about associations, most or a lot of their members could be from the corporate community, and the corporate community is making changes in their own organization pretty swiftly.
Playing off of Renee's comment about needing to act quickly, I think Detroit is a perfect laboratory and a perfect opportunity for organizations to see how different combinations of elements, through necessity, through needing to move quickly in order to get different results, can make a true difference. Let me give you an example of the Detroit River. The Detroit River, historically since the 1700s, was used for commerce. And we actually were using the Detroit River for commerce up until the 50s and 60s, and a lot of those facilities got to be very outdated and were barriers to allowing the public to really enjoy the Detroit River and the wonderful waterway. The opportunity to take out those barriers, in other words, to take out all those old factories and all those old cement plants that used to populate along the river, opened up the potential now for us to connect the residents of Detroit with the beauty of the Detroit River. Cities have a history of creating barriers not in purposeful ways, but they put interstates which divide neighborhoods. In this particular case in Detroit, we had built all these factories and industrial complexes that did commerce along the river, but it didn't allow people to enjoy the river. So what we've done very purposely in Detroit, and very quickly in fact, is we took a lot of those old barriers away, and it's amazing to see how people now are beginning to use the river as a means of enjoyment. We're actually creating new pathways from neighborhoods to the river so that people can now get to the river safely. They're well lit. A lot of police are available to make sure that people feel very safe as they're leaving their neighborhoods and going to the Detroit River. And interestingly enough, I don't even think that's the end of the journey. I think the end of the journey will be when we actually get people into the new Detroit River. So the opportunity is the same for associations.
Well, what I love about the Detroit River example is that it's something that seems so unchanging. It's a river. You can't change the boundaries. You can't pick up and move it. You can't make it out of something besides water. It is a river. But what they did around that stable, constant thing was create so much change that you wouldn't even know it was the same place anymore.
And Misty, I think what is really the smart move is that you watch how people are attracted to water. When you look at all of the most expensive property, it's all along the water. And so we had created a barrier by tying up all that property with commerce. Now we're starting to realize the great advantage to allowing the population to enjoy the water, and people are attracted to it. So what can associations do where there's a natural attraction, a natural momentum that they can take advantage of, that perhaps they've created some barriers in the way because of a historical thought process? Let's remove that thought process. Let's remove those barriers, and let's see if we can create some new momentums.
Just one of the many things associations can learn from the city of Detroit while they're there attending ASAE 2015. And another thing I should mention is Cobo Center, which is where the primary events will be located for the ASAE annual meeting, is right on the Detroit River.
And totally reinvented.
The opportunity for people to learn about reinvention and seeing Detroit as a learning lab to do that. So I think that those are all things that make the experience in Detroit unique. ASAE attendees come because they want to connect with other association executives, as well as learn what are the next practices for association management. So I think that Detroit has a lot to offer ASAE as well as future associations for connecting them with not only having a great time in Detroit and providing great venues for them, but also connecting them to industry that can help them and their members solve those problems.
Misty, I want to spend a few minutes now and talk about how the city of Detroit and the opportunity it has to be a unique and competitive opportunity for a lot of businesses, but in associations in particular, in this particular focus, is in teaching these next practices for executives. So if you don't mind, let's talk about that for a minute, because that's really the exciting part, and that's a part that Detroit is ready to do.
Sure, I think so. I think Detroit's positioned to be that learning laboratory, which is a word that we like to use, and Renee mentioned it too, because again, they are in the middle of it. And what better time to see something happen and change and grow than while it's happening?
So ASAE will be here in August. They will get a chance to experience this city. They'll get a chance to know that there's something very special here that's going on. Meeting planners have an opportunity to bring their groups back to Detroit. And for those meeting planners who are listening, here is the key. The Peer Reinvention team is here to help you connect the city of Detroit to the needs you have within your business or association to help bring these fundamental understandings to your employees.
I think what Peer Reinvention can provide an association that comes back to Detroit is a deeper dive and a very hands-on dive that connects you to the city in a very new way that you're not really going to get at ASAE because there's a lot of other things going on during that time, which is great. ASAE is a wonderful convention. There's a lot to learn and a lot to do. But once you're here in Detroit, I'm willing to bet you're going to want to come back and spend a little more time seeing what the city can teach you.
So when the ASAE convention is over and it's planted in you the desire to want to come back to Detroit, keep in mind a couple of very important things. Participants who come to conferences want to experience outside of the meeting, as importantly as inside of the meeting, the lessons that you're trying to teach. The participants who are coming to conferences of the future want to own and experience directly those new understandings that can't be taught in a PowerPoint presentation in a great large hall. Detroit, in all of its unique offerings that it has, all of the changing climate that it's creating, constantly is building a new content every day. And Pure Reinvention is poised to be able to connect what the meeting planner and what the business wants with the changing climate of available content within the city of Detroit, so we can immerse your participants into an experience that they can then take back to your organization and fundamentally start to address some of these key areas that are going to be so important to the future growth.
You can learn more about us at www.purereinvention.com or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to see what we can offer. And we would love to continue the conversation with you. If you have questions, you can email us at info@purereinvention.com.
Remember, if you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it Pure Reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter at Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.